Evening, Victor.
Hi, Rick. Hi, Lisa. Hi, Louisa. Brenda. Looks like there are 20 folks in the call with us.
I apologize for our last minute revisions and submittals and it being tabbed last day.
And I think we're on the air.
Yep.
Louisa, have you had a chance to save a backup copy of the presentation materials to the server or your?
I have. I just saved one.
Very
just
good.
in case, my computer crashes. Others may proceed.
The 23 people listening to me say that to you know that they probably heard me say before. We always try to have a backup for every backup.
Mm-hmm. Still have the Penman intersection behind me.
You do. I see. That's a really good.
Maybe change that.
Oh, I think it's great. I think that people from Neptune Beach will appreciate seeing their Penman, Florida intersection behind you.
Local news at 6.
And for those who are just joining in, I see we've got the first 26 people already signed on. We had some unexpected competition for tonight's event. They decided just in the last 24 hours or so to open the beach at 5 o'clock. And so people that have been unable to go, get out there, get their dose of salt air and beach breeze are probably all crushing the beach right now. But tonight's presentation is being recorded, so you can reassure your neighbors they haven't missed anything. You can just log on probably tomorrow. We should have it up pretty early, and then you can watch a recording, and the questions we have for people will be there as well. Lisa, we have a mic check for you. Your mic is tough to hear, so when you're unmuted, you're going to want to really speak up.
Okay.
Lisa Nathanson. Yeah, lean in on that mic and really speak up like you're speaking to.
How's that?
Oh, that's much better.
That's much better. Thanks for improving that.
All right.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks for the heads up from our alert reader.
Yes.
And so with that, Louisa, I'm going to mute my mic, let you welcome everybody and introduce Vice Mayor Jones for his welcome, and other panelists. Lisa, you're going to want to mute yourselves until Louisa unmutes us, or we unmute ourselves to jump in. Welcome, everyone. We're right on 6, and it's 30, and we have 36 participants so far.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining, especially given the news that you can be out on the beach right now. So we appreciate you taking the time to watch this presentation live with us. Go ahead and get started. I want to call on Vice Mayor Jones to just say a few words to kind of kick off the end of this week-long charrette that we've been doing. You can unmute yourself, and maybe I have to do it for you. Let me make sure. There we go. All right, Vice Mayor, you should be able to talk now.
Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Thank you very much.
again, I want to personally thank everybody. Well, first of all, I want to know how many people are at the beach right now. That would be the best thing. How many people have their phones with them at the beach and are doing it and multitasking. But really, I just wanted to really extend a heartfelt thanks for all of the participation. I mean, as you guys know, this is probably one of the most, challenging and uncertain times we've ever really been in, and nothing like this has ever really happened before. So I think it's very important that we applaud everybody for being flexible, and particularly the team, the staff at the city and Dover Coal for really coming up with an innovative platform to keep this process moving along. And I think in many respects, it's been great because we've had really excellent participation. And I think it shows how adaptable we can be through a process like this. And yet, despite the fact that, obviously we'd all like to be together in the same room, having this conversation, being able to do this as well and engage and provide our input and feedback on a new platform is still quite valuable. And hopefully this was the most important thing, is that hopefully everybody had fun, that this should have been a very engaging and fun activity. I think, as I mentioned before, the real purpose in doing this was to make sure that we really establish kind of what our future priorities are and investments, and really let this process serve as kind of our North Star, if you will, in terms of the future of Neptune Beach, from a planning standpoint, from a mobility standpoint, from a development standpoint. And again, I think it's important now to recognize that we're part of one of a number of communities. I think that I would say now we rank amongst the illustrious that have taken the step in really doing some skilled and thoughtful planning, because I think that's a real essential part of what we call really sound and defensible decision making. And hopefully what we have out of this is really a document that we can be extremely proud of, and we can allow it to base what types of decisions and investments we make in the future. But with that, I think, again, I'm going to turn it back over to our team here to guide you through the process. And I do want to also caveat that some of the amazing concepts that you see here, nothing is set in stone here. This is really just an exercise in being creative and looking at some of the things, taking the feedback that all of the folks have provided over the past couple of, well, not only this week, but also during our face-to-face kickoff meeting, and really synthesizing all those unique ideas and looking at the opportunities. And so what you're going to see tonight are really just some really draft types of concepts. Nothing is set in stone, and there's going to be a lot of opportunity to continue to provide more feedback and tweak this vision document. Again, this is your plan, and we want to make sure that we get it right. And so with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Louisa to guide everybody through the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. With that, we'll go ahead and get started. A reminder that this meeting, like all of our public meetings, is being recorded. You can check back on our virtual Charrette Hub tomorrow to watch it. I also want to let everyone know that the 2 previous public meetings on Monday and Wednesday are both available now on the website as well. So you can go watch those whenever you have a second. Please share it with anyone you know who maybe wanted to join, but felt that the beach was calling their name, and who can blame them for that. So, let people know that this is available to them. This meeting is set up as a webinar, similar to the workshop we had on Wednesday. So you can click the Q&A button on your Zoom toolbar window, and you can write a question, and our panelists will be answering them as much as they can throughout the meeting. We don't want to take up a lot of your time because we have a lot of material to present to you today. So we will be answering them in writing. The ones we don't get to during the meeting, we'll follow up with those. So I'm going to do a quick introduction, see where we are in the timeline. We're going to look at some of the summary of the big ideas we heard on Monday, and then go through our actual draft, capital D draft, initial recommendations that, were from ideas that we heard from the community. So we're Dover Coal and Partners. We're working with the team, a broader team that includes WGI, who are looking at smart mobility options for the city, as well as hall planning and engineering, our transportation engineers. Full Florida-based team. We're right halfway in our process. We're sticking to the schedule despite what are uncertain circumstances, but still charging ahead, and we'll still on track to have a draft plan presentation sometime in June, and our final plan sometime in August. We already had our neighborhood workshops in February, where we visited the 3 different areas of Neptune Beach to do interactive exercises with the community. This week, we had a number of events. We are now in our final event, the work in progress presentation. For those of you who are new, welcome to the process. I just want to remind people that this is part 1 of a 3-phase process, about 2 years of work in Neptune Beach. So we're working right now on the community vision plan, and that will serve as the foundation when we go to phase 2 and 3 to update the city's comprehensive plan and update the land development code. So this virtual charrette, this week of intensive workshops with people and with stakeholders and technical meetings and all of that had to happen in a virtual format. So here you can see some of the highlights we had throughout the week of our team working on tablets to draw sketches, working with Zoom to have technical meetings, doing live streaming. We had a number of tools available. You can see some examples of that. People talking to us with the planner, live streaming all of our open design studio and all of our public meetings, and then also using social media to advertise all of the events. At our kickoff on Monday night, the video for which you can see on our website, we did a presentation like this one and then broke out into individual Zoom rooms. Here you can see Joe Coles was our facilitator in that room, and everyone kind of chatting and having a good time. So it was a nice way to connect with people on Monday night. This is our participant count so far. We're still going back and tallying these, especially with the live streaming. You know, we haven't checked yet who's been watching the videos. They haven't been up for very long, but we'll be monitoring how many people are actually watching these meetings after the fact as well. But we've gotten a lot of good participation. A lot of people stopped by our open design studios and had some one-on-one conversations. So it was great to see. All of this input is going to be refined over the next couple of months, and will make its way into the draft plan. But nothing is final at this point, as Vice Mayor Jones said. So let's do a quick poll to see who's in the room, as we always like to do. I'm going to launch a poll. You're going to see just a couple of questions. Those of you who join with the Zoom app will be able to answer them, and then we'll take a look at the answers together, and I'll be reading those out as well. So I'm going ahead and launching the poll. Should see a pop-up window, which you can move around. Question number 1, have you attended any of the previous public meetings, including the January project kickoff, February neighborhood workshops, or any of the virtual charrette events? What neighborhood, your options are yes or no. Second question, what neighborhood do you live in Neptune Beach? East of 3rd Street, between Penman Road and 3rd, west of Penman Road. I live in one of the other beaches communities. I live in the city of Jacksonville, or I don't live in the greater Jacksonville area. And finally, how old are you? All right, we're getting several votes. About 50% of the people who have the ability to participate in the poll have answered. All right, about 60% have voted. Okay, seems to be a lull. 9, okay, a couple more. All right, going to go ahead and close the poll. And again, these are feeler questions. You know, it's not scientific. Not everyone, people who join by phone may not be able to, aren't able to take the poll. So this is just for us to have a very rough idea of who joined. So it looks like most people on our call today who were able to respond have gone to at least one of the other public meetings. So that's great. Welcome back. Thanks for sticking with it. To the couple of newcomers, thanks for joining. Looks like we have a majority of folks east of 3rd here, about 45% of people who responded. And then about 20% each for west of Penman and the central Neptune Beach neighborhood. Majority of the, or 40% of the participants between 50 and 65, another 30%, another 40% between 25 and 49. And we have one teenager with us, or pre-teenager. So welcome, thanks for joining on your Friday evening. Okay, wonderful.
Did you get the toys put up?
Vice Mayor Jones, I think your mic is live.
Oh my God.
And now we know who the preteen attendees are.
Yes.
Thanks to your 3 kids for joining.
It was almost timed. All right, great. So I wanted to take this chance just to, talk a little bit about change and how towns and cities evolve. Neptune Beach has a rich history. We love that you all still have preserved your original city hall. It's just nice to think about how the evolution of your city in particular has gone and how this is kind of the next big step in what that evolution looks like. So yeah, if anyone has great historical photos, we're always welcome to those. We had a gentleman join us in the open design studio who was sitting in front of a map. So he shared it with us, which is really great. We love to see that stuff. I'm just going to reiterate one more time, if anyone joined late, all the images and ideas presented today are drafts. They were quickly produced in the last 5 days. Everything you're seeing has been produced in the last 5 days. Some of it has been finished in the last hour. So it is all fresh ink, as Victor likes to say.
And all subject to change. So,
yes.
But, like the best restaurants have that full disclosure kitchen where you can see them cooking in there before they're bringing anything. Where this is a full disclosure, open, transparent process where you can see our work in progress as we go, mistakes and all. So, therefore, don't feel bashful about telling us where you see something you think might be on the wrong track. This is our digital equivalent of letting you come into the studio and look over our shoulders.
Yeah. Great. So this is a preliminary summary of the big ideas that we heard in our small group visioning exercises, and it's fairly consistent with everything we've heard from the community, both at the kickoff meeting back in January and at the February workshops too. We asked people to categorize their 3 big ideas, and 40% of people's big ideas had something to do with streets, trails, transportation, and parking. Another big category was public space, parks, and recreation. So we've heard a lot about those 2 things, and you're going to see a lot of ideas about kind of that fit within those buckets. So we're going to start with some draft ideas about streets, transportation, and parking. As I just mentioned, this was a really important topic to everyone we spoke about. This is a community that's really passionate about walking and biking and safety. So we heard you when we asked our 3 neighborhoods during the neighborhood workshops what they would categorize their neighborhood in the future in 1 word. We heard, we want it to be walkable, bike friendly, we want more walkability, in addition to all the things that it already is: charming, peaceful, beautiful, family oriented. So we asked what kinds of mobility options people like the most when we gave them several different options, and overwhelmingly the ones that were the most popular are the slow-moving, safe modes, such as separated multi-use paths, nature trails, slow electric privately operated shuttles, and separated cycle tracks and mobility lanes. So there's definitely been a lot of consensus around mobility, which is great, and bikeability and walkability. So we asked people on Monday night, okay, we need to get into more specifics. We want to know, where are the places that we should be walking and biking and skateboarding that's separated from cars? What should that network look like? So with that, I'm going to introduce Lisa Nissenson from WGI. Lisa, let me know when you want to go to the next slide. Right here we have our draft summary input map on mobility.
Okay, good evening, everyone, and I'm so glad you were able to join us. What we tried to do is over the past couple of months, actually, just go around Neptune Beach, gather information, talk to people, and we tried to condense everything in this one map that looks a little bit crazy, but we wanted to let you know that we heard what you said. And these, of course, doesn't represent every single comment we got, but big buckets of comments on which intersections need improvement, where you want to cross, how you want to build this network. So next slide, please. I just want to say a couple of things about the shuttles and how they work. So most of these are what are called demand responsive, or it's almost like Uber and Lyft, where you can actually summon a vehicle on your phone. These different shuttles actually don't follow any particular route like public transit, but rather they will come to you, or at least close to you, to pick you up and take you to a destination. So that's why you don't see shuttle routes on the maps per se, but we do expect that they can link the various destinations. These shuttles are low speed, so they will typically go 10 to 15 miles per hour now, but we expect that they'll go faster over time. We had a lot of people ask us about, well, what does it take to get an automated shuttle? And around the state, we are one of the tops in getting pilots. And so how can we help Neptune Beach pick some routes that are pilot projects where you'll be able to test it and which sorts of trips are the best? You may need to have some certain street design and some digital infrastructure and signage. So we'll make sure to include that in the final product. Next. We also are paying attention to parking. We understand that there is a parking study underway and that a lot of the street work we are going to work on has additional and future parking implications. But the ones we wanted to point out are possible location for garages. We got a lot of input on the necessity for beach parking. We've also got plans for some of the on-street parking in and around the beach center, town center, excuse me, and we've got ideas there. There's also the possibility of a residential parking permit zone. And again, this is just draft, but we're looking at other cities to see how best to formulate something for Neptune Beach. Next. We were also wondering about the parking garage of the future because now the state of the practice is parking is sort of in flux where we, of course, right now we have low demand, but as soon as we reopen up, we expect to have high demand. But that may taper off over time as we find other modes and ways to get around. So really architects are looking now at adaptable garages. There's this thing called self-parking in your cars. You may have seen the Hyundai ad during the Super Bowl of the car that parks itself. And that vastly reduces the amount of space needed for cars, and it's rapidly being introduced into new models. And so we're going to pay attention to that so that we can give you the best input on how to design your garages. We also need to think hard about the reality of the finances because the construction, especially if it's quality and it's made to be adaptable, can be quite expensive. So we'll be looking into that for you. Next. For the residential parking permit, St. Augustine to the south actually has a pretty good residential parking permit that they've tweaked a couple of times. Some of the features there are they allow Park Now cards for the residents. So if residents wanted to be able to pay at the meters at the beach's town center, for example, that would be made easier. In the controlled areas in St. Augustine, residents can apply for 2 residential permits or their decals that go on the car, in addition to guest and service passes. And then what they do is they assess the hours or restrictions that vary block by block, just depending on what the parking pressures are. And then multifamily may be included on a case-by-case basis. Next, please.
Lisa, I also just want to reiterate, because that we have a couple of new people who joined us, that
Sure.
this meeting was set up as a webinar. So if you have any questions, please hit the Q&A button on your Zoom control. That way we have a record and a log of all the questions we received. We can try and answer them, us the panelists, in real time. If we don't get to them, we can follow up with questions after the meeting, written responses to your questions. Sorry, go ahead, Lisa.
No, thank you. And if you're new to this series, if you have a question, please put it in the chat.
In the Q&A.
Or the Q&A, I'm so sorry. So now we're going through a series of maps. I just want to give you a heads up. And what this represents is how the comments and all of the things that we studied over the past couple of months are coming together. So this first map shows some of the existing multi-use paths, as well as the 3rd Street, where we got a lot of comments on improving pedestrian safety. So we wanted that to be a kind of a base layer, if you will. Next. Then what we did is overlaid on that the proposed multi-use paths. And this is any path that is already proposed either by your city or region or state. And that's, I guess what you'd say, on the books. And then in addition to those, the orange dotted lines represent some of the areas where a multi-use path may make sense in addition to those that exist and are proposed. Next. Then what we did is we laid over atop that the top dangerous intersections where people really wanted us to focus. Next. And then on top of that, we looked at some of the multi-use connection points. And again, you see that some of these are intersections show up in multiple categories. Next. On top of that, we put some of the key pedestrian points where we really need to also focus. And so some of those are along some of these roads, but also can be around schools as well. So that's where we heard the desire to get some better attention to crossing infrastructure. Next. Then we overlaid some of the access to water, because that was one of the strongest community design elements that really came up, is this: we want to access water on both sides. So we put in possible water trails and marsh access as well. Next. And of course, the access to the waterways themselves. Next. And then this is just everything on the map. So if you want to go back and reference this map with your neighbors who couldn't make it, this is the one that puts it all together. Next. And then with Rick, we've been looking at some of the FDOT, Florida Department of Transportation, context classification systems. And Louisa, do you want me to carry on, or is this Rick's part of the presentation?
Rick, could you quickly talk through the context classification maps?
Yeah, take us back one map, and the two major roadways are the ones under Florida DOT jurisdiction. That's A1A, which is locally called 3rd, and then Atlantic Boulevard. And for many years, we worked in the transportation business. Everything we designed was either rural or suburban, and we didn't really much pay attention to the walkability in the urban places. But this is a new DOT. It's a brand new approach they're taking now. They have divided the state into context classification zones, so zones of different context. And the DOT has called the orange line at the top on Atlantic suburban commercial, as it exists today. And then the darker color is urban general. So you have enough of a grid street system on A1A and 3rd Street to bump it up from just a suburban category to an urban category. And the higher your number gets, the greater your walkability. That's why that's important.
Hey, Rick. Just a quick comment on this map. It looks like, to most people looking at a map, this is just like a couple of colored lines. What does this mean? What this means is that if you're in one category, the State Department of Transportation now has permission in their manuals to let you do all those good things you want to do, like control the speed and make it more walkable or put trees and things. Whereas in the past, 5, 10, 15 years ago, they might have said no to that same thing, saying, we can't do that. It's not in our book. So this is a huge breakthrough. And all week long, I heard people say, in the past, they've been told the transpocracy, who has said no to things that people would really like to see. They now have permission in this system to say yes to some things they said no to in the past. That's huge. So, Rick, I stalled there so you can show them the difference between existing and what if.
These are just showing the Florida DOT streets. What we are going to do is have the context classification definitions on all of your local streets also. So the suburban is showing up here as a blue suburban residential. And the purple up in the upper right corner is an urban center, a C5. And this is a proposed. This gets us away from just being locked in on the future, on the existing way things are today. And this is what we've heard from you as to what you would like to transform different portions of your city into a different context, and take some of that urban center and move it out onto A1A and Atlantic. And then that's the justification for you to have DOT change the character of that roadway. Major, major change in the way they're doing business.
I'll add a point to that, Rick, is that this is about how land use and transportation overlap. So the goal is that you have the land use patterns that match the type of street you want and vice versa, right?
And the DOT can then, if you tell the DOT that we want to have this be a slow or walkable street, then they have every right to come in and say, okay, what are you as the local government doing with your zoning and your land development regulations to make the right kind of buildings and scale of the enclosure on the street come to fruition from your local side where you make the decisions. And then they're saying they will give you the street that matches the context that you want. Mm-hmm. And it's playing out pretty well across the state.
Great. So I'm going to ask Brenda to unmute herself if she's not already. Brenda and Rick have been working this week on producing initial street sections that show how 3rd Street, A1A, and Penman can be redesigned in the future.
Hi, yeah, can you hear me? Okay, so this is what it looks like to stand on 3rd Street, A1A. You see here that you have a very narrow sidewalk and a grass strip. They're very wide lanes. Next slide. And this is existing on Atlantic Boulevard. There is a median and there's left-hand turn lanes there. Also some conditions for pedestrians. You have very, very narrow sidewalks and a short grass strip. So it's not as comfortable as if you had shady trees when it's a really hot summer. Next slide. So we started with some sketches. It all starts with an idea. We start sketching. It's all very, very rough. So this is what we showed and at our pinups, and we all talk about it and we decide whether these are good ideas or not. As you can see, there are many alternatives. There's A option and then a B option, and sometimes there's a C option. So we work through that and as a group, and we decide what best fits the streets. Next slide. So this is just modeling the existing conditions for 3rd Street. Again, you have a very narrow sidewalk and you have on-street parking. This is looking southbound. You have a median and very wide lanes, which makes traffic go really fast, even though there's a speed limit of 35 miles per hour. Next slide. Very similar conditions for Atlantic Boulevard. This is looking westbound. You have a nice median there, but you have most of the street is dedicated to the vehicular traffic. Next slide. And so this is option A, option 1, for both Atlantic Boulevard and 3rd Street. We noticed that they have very similar conditions as far as right-of-way. It has the same dimensions. So we said, what if we planned and designed something that could make it more pleasant to walk and to ride your bike and get to one place to another. So this is a situation where you have on-street parking on one side of the street, and you have enough width for a bus lane, for a bus to get through for any bus routes. You have a narrower lane there. You still have a median, a landscape median with shade trees, and you have the same condition on the other side without a on-street parking. The goal of this section here is to have a wider sidewalk on both sides and to have enough space for shade trees, which we believe would improve the walkability and experience of walking on these streets. Right now, it's not very safe and it's not very pleasant. So landscaping that nicely would really improve that and give it some character as well. Next slide. So this is option 2. So what we're doing here is we're removing that on-street parking, and we're.
Hey, Brenda.
Yeah.
Just a quick thing. We're getting some complaints about your mic. Folks are
sorry.
having a hard time hearing you.
Yeah.
So I think it seems to cut in and out a little bit. So if I could, Rick, could you jump in here? Your mic seems to be coming through a little more solid. Okay. And just help, if you don't mind, Brenda, just let Rick's mic take it and describe the difference between the options. Just one more time. And Louisa, would you back up one slide? I'm watching the chat and the Q&A for these cues from people who are having technical difficulties. Thank you, Brenda. All right, Rick, we're going to ask Louisa to back it up a slide, and then you'll need to turn around and face your camera and just do, if you don't mind, repeat what Brenda was just going through, the difference between the options, and just in the simplest terms so we can go through. Thank you.
In the past, as Brenda mentioned, the vegetation has been gathered together in the central median, and it's really against the rules for the pedestrians to even walk anywhere near that vegetation. And so we've studied cities in hundreds and hundreds of locations, and so we know what conditions are really conducive for people to get out and walk. And so let's go to the next slide. And you'll see the change. Look at the shade, look at the feeling of enclosure that you get. And these conditions, when they're put in, the people just appear. If there's any economic vitality in the city, which you certainly have, the people will get out and use these areas. The buses on the outside edge, that's the least amount of width they like to use in the city transit. Is 11 feet, and that what we do is take every half a foot that we can, and make sure the pedestrians will be happier with the way we use the width of the roadway. A 10-foot lane may sound small, but a 12-foot lane is one they use on the interstate highway system, which is way too much for regular driving by people in a walkable place like this. And the parking we keep on one side, it would be to help support some of the commercial activity. Now there's a possible lane that we've drawn in on the outer edge. You see the sidewalk that's 7 feet wide. And then there's a 6-foot mobility lane. We don't call it a bike lane. We don't call it a jogging lane. We say mobility because in the next 5 years, we professionals even don't understand what new modes might be used. It could there could be an electric scooter revolution. There could be something invented that we're not familiar with yet. So that mobility lane is going to be specified for vehicles under 10 miles per hour, under 15 miles per hour, or some limit on the speed. And because when you have the same group of speeds that people are traveling, that's what makes it safe. What many of you have probably thought, I really don't want a bicycle out there on those fast-moving state highway lanes. And you're very wise to think that for your own safety. And you don't really want to bicycle on the sidewalks all the way. So this mobility lane is an opportunity to give you a chance to get out there and get on your bicycle, your electric bicycle, or even walking, and have a good shady place for you that goes a long distance and really gets you somewhere as a part of the system.
Hey, Rick, just one quick thing about that cross section that you showed. The 7 feet of sidewalk is that part of the sidewalk that is inside the right of way. You can certainly get more sidewalk width than that within the setback that's on the private property, but between there and the front of the building. So just to clarify, you're not limited to merely a 7-foot sidewalk.
Yes. When a restaurant goes into the building on the right, and they want to have some outdoor dining opportunities, that green grass will go right to a patio of some type, and that'll be usable by the restaurant or by the public as an easement for a wider sidewalk. Yes, that's good, Victor. Now over to PENMAN. PENMAN is one of the few long connecting streets that you have besides those 2 state roadways. The cul-de-sac and suburban community patterns of development that happened after 1950 or 55 really were trying to keep out the fast-moving traffic, so they're hard to get through if you want to go a long distance. And that's proper, we understand that. But this is one of the streets that you have left to use as a mobility corridor for people that want to go a longer distance. But it's about 100 feet wide, and when you see this, you know it's really too wide to have the drivers even think about going a little slower. So subconsciously, that foot goes on the accelerator when there's a lot of green grass on either side. And so that's the existing condition of 100 feet. 2 11-foot lanes, again, they're not 12, and that's good that they're 11. We think they can go down a little bit more because speed is so very important to the safety of the crossing pedestrians and even the drivers themselves. Speed is so important that I have a radar gun. This is you push that little red button and you get the speed reading of a car going in and out of the back of the radar gun, 800 or 900 feet away from you in either direction, coming or going. So I take this wherever I go and studying places. I've used it in Neptune Beach, and you're mostly behaving yourselves. But speed is so vital that that we pay attention to it with every design element. Now, that 13-foot lane in the middle, there are many driveways for residences that are all along PENMAN. And for them to want to turn left into their driveway, if they were in a lane where people were waiting behind them, they would all be very uncomfortable. So you're allowed to get into that lane, turn into your driveway. So that's important to keep as a safety measure. Now for alternatives, we like the sidewalks, we like the trees. There's even a bioswale. Look on the very outside, the 7-foot. We don't want water to drain off of all these facilities and quickly rush down to a stormwater conveyance. We like it to take its time, dwell for a little while, and give you some green garden type area in addition. So we have 7 feet on the outside, 5 feet right next to the roadway on either side, and then another 7 on the far side as bioswales, where plant material will be strategically planted to take up water and to slow down the flow of water until it can be absorbed. Then the big addition is in that 10-foot planting strip to get a good row of marching trees. When we first started looking at what would help the walkability of cities across the United States, the places we saw that had lots of pedestrians, very active, all had shade trees, and in areas like this. Then we've got a 6-foot mobility lane. We like that again, same as described in the previous discussion. So that's for bicycles and other modes that are going about the same speed. 2 10-foot lanes to slow it down. And we had to leave 12 because people that are turning into their driveways sometimes get a little bit of an angle on their car, and so they needed 12 feet instead of 10. The roundabout or signalized intersection options on this location have really occupied a lot of our analysis time. This is Penman in Florida and Forest, your 5 points intersection. It's a very important junction for those long arterial roadways or collector roadways that serve the entire area. So it's important for them to stay relatively uncongested, but you do want the pedestrians moving across these crosswalks as they travel down the long approach roadways. Speed, as I said, very important. My speed gun again. You should get one of these if you're at all interested in safety. And you go to a meeting anywhere you go, and you say, you know, this is our speed gun. We took 30 samples, and they were 27% above the posted speed limit by 10 miles per hour or more. And that's a whole lot more effective, and you have credibility instead of just standing up and saying, well, it's kind of sort of fast out there and we're concerned. So when you are a pedestrian, if you're unfortunate enough to be hit by a moving vehicle, and that moving vehicle is going 20, it's one chance out of 10 that you would be a fatality from that crash. And then if the vehicle is going 30, then about half the time you or your friends would not survive the crash. 40 miles per hour, there's not much of a chance at all that you would survive that kind of crash, because we are vulnerable, and the momentum of the car has so much energy when it's moving at those higher speeds. It's an exponential curve of power that they get when they go just an increment of 10 miles per hour more. So speed has to be a consideration for every single element of the street and intersection design. This is a roundabout that was previously designed by the city of Jacksonville. They hired a company called Metric Engineering. And because we know from their traffic counts that the Penman Road to Florida, Penman Road south to Florida Northwest volumes are the highest, they tried one that had 2 lanes circulating there to give it more capacity for that movement to get people to make that left turn movement. Safety, again, very important. With a roundabout, with any roundabout, your high speeds are lowered. You can't run the middle of this roundabout. And then when you have an approach to the roundabout and you don't have to stop, as in this case, you only have to yield to anybody that's traveling in the roundabout, you're stopped less. So your driving time can be a little better, your capacity can be a little better, but it's not achieved through high speed. It's achieved through moderation and management of the speed of the vehicles going around the cycle, the roundabout. There are some longer crosswalks that are occurring when we add the extra lanes to the roundabout. And with any roundabout, there's about a 6-week learning curve for people that are learning how to drive through it. But people there's a survey that said 70 or 80% of people are opposed to roundabouts before they're constructed, and 70 or 80% really like the roundabouts once they're finished and they get a chance to drive them. And we also had an alternative that had a single lane roundabout. Now the single lane, you see, even looks simpler from the air.
Hey, Rick. So I can help you get through this. I want to remind everybody the longer and more detailed presentation about roundabout and alternatives, like the signalized, more compact signalized intersection. It's all summarized in a recording of Wednesday night's session, which went into this in exquisite detail. So you don't have to do that now, and I have to push you along.
That sounds good. Thank you for reminding me of that. We came up with a roundabout that had a smaller diameter because speed is important again. And the tighter the radius, the slower the vehicles will travel through the roundabout. And we got those splitter islands and crosswalks lined up so this long and popular East Coast Greenway Trail would have an easy time getting across the northern leg of this roundabout to continue over to the east. This is one of the most important things to me personally as a transportation engineer and as a person that has a family. When you put in a roundabout versus a signalized intersection, in this study of 40 different intersections, the fatal or incapacitating crashes went down 90%. So as I said, you can't run a roundabout. The view that you is most important to you as an individual to consider is what happens when somebody makes a mistake. Either somebody misses seeing the red phase in the signal because they're looking down, texting, or talking to a friend of theirs in the car. So when the crash occurs, how fast is the vehicle going? That's the most important thing to you. So there you have the 68% opposed, 73% favored after construction.
I'm gonna go just past this one. I think this is worth looking more in detail at the PENMAN workshop, Rick, where you went through the different traffic counts and level of service.
Yeah.
This is new though, so if you want to share it.
Yes, some of the discussion in that Wednesday meeting and other communication with you citizens was what happens with the school so close? Won't that be a dangerous situation? And in fact, the speed management characteristics of the roundabouts make them ideal partners for mobility at the schools. And this is one, is the Fruitville Elementary School in Sarasota. And there are 2 roundabouts, in fact. The building with the blue roof on it is a church, and then the other building with the red and the gray building roofs are a fairly large elementary school. And boy, the kids get out, and there's a crossing guard generally, like the one you have now at this intersection at Florida and Penman. And they help people across the crosswalks at the roundabout. But it's just a safer thing for the kids. And here's another one in North Carolina, roundabout right next to a school grounds, and that leads to all the other residential areas. So it's a very safe situation. Now there are ADA requirements. That's the ADA. Victor?
Well,
disabilities.
we were asked a question during Wednesday's workshop, and then we've gotten some emails about that afterward, about how one sets up these kinds of intersection designs that are different from conventional ones, so that they are accessible to people who are impaired, or and how they meet the requirements for all ages and abilities.
The
And
national,
so
the
the
national,
physically, visually impaired or just vulnerable users of the roadway. So these are some of the standards we've been collecting. We're going back through the checklist. That's why it's shown here with checks, to make sure that every one of these measures can be met in this road.
it's the American with Disabilities Act, ADA, and so they're consciously and diligently looking for ways to make sure that our less mobile portion of our population, sight impaired and physically impaired, get across our roadways. And roundabouts treat these folks very, very well. What they say is if you're crossing a single lane, which you would for each of these splitter islands crosswalks, that you don't need to go the extra mile of having an audio signal with a push button that tells you if there are drivers moving through the roundabout. But mainly you put up signs that notify all of the drivers that they must be aware that it's state law that you stop when a person is in the crosswalk. Now, we also wanted to give a good amount of time to the option of keeping the traffic signals operating at this intersection. We did notice that the crosswalks were a little far apart, and we've drawn an option that has them closer together, so you have shorter traffic signal times. And so this is the alternative that we have sketched out, that if you decide to go with a non-roundabout option, this is one way to improve the intersection of Florida and Penman.
I'm quickly going to go through just the visualizations of those two options, the single lane roundabout and then the improved signalized intersection. So here you can see the existing conditions at the intersection of Florida Boulevard and Penman. This direction is south on Penman Road. Over here, it's north on Penman Road. This way is northwest on Florida Boulevard. And here in the corner, you have forest. So this again is the existing condition. Here's option one with a single lane roundabout. We see that we've put in a signature tree, a number of other items here. You can see the ADA tactile pavers that let the sight impaired know when they're approaching an area with vehicles. You have the splitter islands, the refuge areas, signage that indicates to drivers that there are people crossing, as well as a sign that this is where your East Coast Greenway is running as well. You'll notice the car yield zone. We always leave a car length space between the entrance of the roundabout and the crosswalk. That gives pedestrians a break to look, to make eye contact with the vehicles before they enter, and the cars behind them as well. Of course, if you don't want a signature tree, you can put a signature statue. This is our octopus statue that we have drawn in after some feedback from the community. We thought, well, maybe this should just be a statue of King Neptune himself. This is obviously something for the community to decide, but it's an opportunity to display some public art. This is back to the existing conditions, so we can show you the second option, which is the improved signalized intersection. You can see these different islands and dedicated right turn lanes that we've created, and how we've actually pushed the intersection and made it much smaller. Actually added pavers to the intersection that gives a tactile difference for drivers. They know they're going over these rumbly pavers, that this is a slow area. And there's a second option with that, which would be replacing the existing traffic signals with your more traditional mast arms. We'll be looking at another option with just one assembly that goes diagonally across, similar to what's there, but on the actual mast arms. Some of the features of this design. I'll quickly go through them, all of them, so you get a chance to see, again, the existing condition. Here is option 1 of the reduced roundabout with a center tree. Here's an option with public art instead. Here you have option 2A, which is the improved signalized intersection. And then the same intersection, but with the mast arms added and the new traffic signal. Wonderful. So now we're going to go on to sustainability, recreation, and open space. Similar to streets and transportation, a lot of people had ideas and felt very passionately about providing more public space and opportunities for recreation, as well as for stormwater infrastructure and climate. So the results we heard varied a bit in terms of the kinds of civic spaces and open spaces people wanted across the 3 different neighborhoods. So east of 3rd, they really liked the idea of a shared street, of a neighborhood square and parklets. Between PENMAN and 3rd, they also liked the neighborhood square, but the kayak launch was very important, as well as the senior center. And then west of PENMAN, they really liked the recreational facilities like the kayak launch, the beach boardwalk, and a marsh walk. The senior center was also very important. So Sue Zhang, one of our designers, has been focusing specifically on areas for new trails, ways to put in water access, and different streetscapes and gateway elements that are harmonious with nature. So she's collected all the ideas we heard in our maps and in our virtual maps on Monday night. And she's put together a draft map to kind of locate where these different places could be. And so that includes opportunities for kayak launches that you see here, opportunity for potential new marsh walk along here and here. And we're still exploring which one is the most feasible. But these are possible locations. Also for a pocket park or an improved park here at the end of Forest and at the end of Seagate. And also what we call these gateway improvements. So areas where that can just really be enhanced with a new signature public space. Oh, there's also a fishing spot new that she added. That's in a pond that would go across with this canal trail. We heard a lot about this canal trail, and Sue looked into it in more detail of what that trail could look like. A lot of people, we've been told, are already using this path, and there's a chance to do a lot of nice things on it, and the path doesn't have to look the same the whole way across. So Sue's gone in and actually started to break up what the different characteristics of that trail could be like as it goes through different environments. So here, as it goes along this canal, parallel to 3rd Street, we're calling it more of a civic and commercial character. It would go along the commercial buildings, it passes through the library, then it goes into Jarbo Park where it has a different character, and then it goes through a residential area potentially, if it is to continue, and eventually to Fletcher. And Sue's been doing a lot of research on hardscape versus low impact development, which is when you use natural elements to help filter, clean stormwater, and also slow it down. And as much as possible, when you can do more of the one on the left hand, you create ecosystems there that are beautiful, but also serve to clean your water right where it lands and where it's collected. And there's lots of successful case studies she's been looking at. These are, this is a park in Singapore that used to look like what you see on the right upper corner, and they've since transformed it into a nature park. And she's been looking specifically at different landscape, different vegetation that can be planted along the canal. And so there's an opportunity to connect this trail that would run along the commercial properties of this canal to this pond as a potential area for a recreation with a small picnic seating area and a place to fish. That's a city-owned pond. And so here she's done some before and after visuals, we like to say. So this is the existing condition of where this trail is running. This is right adjacent to the library. And until the library doesn't really interact at all with this space, it's the back of the library, there's no fenestration, there's no windows, there's no openings that spill light onto the space. And there also is no formal trail. So Sue thought this was a really good opportunity to do a unique public space. So what if this could be transformed into a really special place where people can enjoy nature, gather together. You see that she's incorporated public art and murals along the wall, the back wall of the library, colorful seating areas, as well as a really nice trail for people to walk on. So this bridge, this potential bridge connection is what would take people to that pond that I showed in the previous slide. So this is a part of the trail that goes through Jarbo Park. So here again, an opportunity of how this part of the trail could look different. So Sue did a lot of sketching. She was trying to figure out how this would work and what plants she wanted to use and what the different elements would be, a floating leaf area, a grass zone. And so from this sketch, she actually went and created an image. So this is the existing trail right now. And then here is what it could look like with proper vegetation, natives, using native plants as much as possible, not only to filter stormwater as it runs off the trail and into this canal, but also to create habitat. And this is a proposed bridge that's part of the park plan that's already underway, including educational opportunities, signage to explain to the community what they're looking at, what the plants and animals are. And here you can see how she's kind of divided the different zones that can happen when if you're cutting a slice through this trail. Here's what the different zones are. So you have a floating leaved planting zone, an emergent planting zone, and a grassy zone. So here is the possible location for that bridge. We're still seeing, where exactly it should go. And there's a lot more to come on this subject too.
Louisa, while you're on the subject of the trails, can you just drop back one?
Sure.
Listening to the conversations this week, and I was in on some Zoom meetings and online design studio interaction and so on, where some of these ideas were emerging during the course of the week. One of the frequent questions with trails, especially in neighborhoods where people aren't used to them, is about safety. And so I just want to go on the record saying we heard you. We have heard your questions about safety. And there are a lot of basic best practices, like making sure that trails are properly supervised. They have what we call natural surveillance, or what maybe in your neighborhood you call eyes on the street. You have to have eyes on parks and eyes on linear parks as well. Also, so any place that's occupied by people is automatically safer than one where there's hardly anyone around. Because you can see or you can call for help or that kind of thing. Now, you also need lighting and standards for operation. And then you can go beyond that to get more and more safety, cameras, so that sort of thing. But there's a lot of trail projects all over the country where they've confronted the exact same issue. And I think I just want to make you aware that we heard you, we heard the question, and we come back with more details on these trail ideas. We're going to make sure that we can answer your questions about safety.
Great, thanks, Victor. So now we're going to move on to commercial redevelopment and ideas for the town center. And I know the previous section talked about open space, but we're still going to see a lot of examples of open space with these ideas as well. There's a lot of interconnectivity between these three topics, so you'll see some ideas that also relate to transportation and street design. So there were some big ideas, or several combined, that are about local businesses, commercial redevelopment, and the town center. So this is another big topic that we need to address and come up with solutions and ideas for. So we asked people during our neighborhood workshops what type of commercial places that they liked. And by far the most popular were the kinds of places that are really sensitive to the context of the community. Such as, a small neighborhood coffee shop that almost looks like a home, a local restaurant, corner store, a neighborhood commercial center, and this mixed-use town center, which is an example from Jacksonville. We also asked about housing, and we'll talk about this a little later on, but wanted to bring up that there were some missing middle options, such as the duplex and the courtyard bungalows, and accessory dwelling units such as a granny flat that were also popular with all three neighborhoods. So we presented this on Monday, and we bring it out again here for anyone who didn't join us Monday. we're not exactly sure how COVID-19 is going to impact us. But we do know that it right now, or we don't know how long those impacts will last. We do know for the moment that what we're hearing from the professionals is that all types of real estate will take a hit. And it's similar to what we've seen in our work as well, working in several different cities where there's active development projects. We're hearing this over and over again. That all types of real estate will take a hit, but that retail and hospitality, and that includes hotels and restaurants, will bear the brunt of that decline. Multifamily apartments are the least likely to be badly affected. The student and senior housing are less secure. And this is not unexpected. This is similar to what we saw with the Great Recession as well. But these impacts will be felt differently by each market and region. So we wanted to understand a little bit better why people gravitated towards this example. And this is Tapestry Park. And we thought it was a great precedent to look at because it's 18 acres. It's roughly a similar size to the Kmart parcel, for example, which is 20 acres in total, if you include the Luckies. And it includes boutique hotels, not unlike the ones that the developers had originally received a work order to build, a lot of office, a lot of retail, a couple of luxury apartments, and some townhomes. So we're going to show some examples, and we heard from a lot of people that they don't want to see apartments at all. Some people said, you know, we don't mind seeing apartments, but a few small buildings or some apartments over a few shops would be okay. So we don't have the answer to this question, but we're going to show you alternatives as a starting point of what's possible. And you know, the same thing we heard with the bungalow court, which was really loved, and for everyone we showed this example to and explained this kind of option to, that, you know, they were worried about density and parking and things that come with that. And they were worried how it would fit the character of their neighborhood, but this is an example of how you could maybe get density and still keep it in the character of your community. We asked the same thing with the types of commercial businesses, and we, you know, realized that how these places are designed is of the utmost important. Nobody responded positively to any more strip and suburban type commercial buildings, but they like to see the kinds of commercial buildings that respond to their and that add to the character of the community. So we've slightly tweaked this map. This is still a draft map that's starting to identify some more near-term opportunity sites for redevelopment. And in the crosshatch pattern in purple, you see some long-term sites for redevelopment. And so this is based on conversations we have, you know, what we've heard. So this is still a living document of how where we're looking at opportunities for redevelopment. And you see it really is concentrated on Atlantic Boulevard and 3rd Street above Walnut for the most part. So it is a very limited area that is where we're looking at redevelopment. And with that, I will introduce Victor to explain this slide.
You know, during the course of the conversations this week, one of the things we realized is that when we just throw out a term like planners use, like mixed use, people immediately wonder, well, what does that mean? What do you mean by that was a frequently asked question this week. And so I appreciate that, because mixed use is a kind of catch-all term that planners and architects and transportation planners and so on use to describe a more flexible mixture. Sometimes what's upstairs in a mixed-use building is office space, and sometimes it's a hotel upstairs and a restaurant downstairs. Sometimes what's upstairs could be housing, whether it's owner-occupied, like condominiums, or apartments. And so the answer to the question about what do you mean by mixed use is it depends. That's a very site-specific thing, and but there is one thing about mixed use that's pretty fundamental, which is putting some destinations within walking distance of people where people are working or living. And so when you do that, something very interesting happens. So, for one thing, car trips get shorter, because if they get fewer and they get shorter. So some people who still drive less distance if they can find what they're looking for without having to go a long way. So that's one of the benefits of having a mix, a combination of living and working, and living and shopping, or living and dining. Then other trips might be moved altogether from a driving trip to walking, biking, or transit as a result of having mixed it. And there's something interesting that happens with that evolution as you add a little more choices. Just imagine a neighborhood, Main Street or four corners of where there's some mixed use. And if there's just one restaurant, well, then you go there that one day a week or that one day a month that you want what they serve in that one restaurant. But if there are a handful of them, there's one that's more expensive and one that's a sandwich shop at low price, well, then you might go to that same corner twice in a given period because there's more choice. So as choice increases, benefits accrue. And one of those benefits has to do with our carbon footprint. A lot of people ask us about resilience, about adaptation and mitigation of sea level rise. So the transportation planners will tell you, well, if you interconnect the streets and design the town more like a web and less like a tree so that people can get from A to B, your carbon footprint will go down because you've made it possible to make shorter trips, and you've also made walking and biking and transit feasible. Similarly, if you build a little more compactly instead of spreading everything farther out, for the same reasons, your carbon footprint can also drop because you just don't run the car as far and you don't produce as much tailpipe emissions or use as much fossil fuel energy. But something interesting happens with the mixed use. When there are more choices, like more retail parcels within walking distance of a given residence, with a little bit more, your carbon footprint goes down. But after you hit a certain point, it drops like a rock. And that's what you see in this graph. And so anyway, just to advance this conversation about mixed use. First, what I mean by that depends. And then mixed use has benefits. So here's a slide which I just literally dragged straight from the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA's own slide. And they're showing work done here by Dr. Reed Ewing for the National Research Council that studied 239 real estate developments, including historical ones and newly created ones in 6 different regions. And what they showed was that the vehicle miles traveled per person goes down. So here's the point. If you're worried about traffic, about traffic congestion, or about, who are all these people in all those cars? One of the things you can do to help with that is bringing land uses closer together instead of spreading them further apart. And that's why mixed use and transportation impact are so important. So if you hear about mixed use development, that can be a strategy for reducing the traffic problem per capita or per dollar spent in the cash register of your local store. It also tends to help people have more options, like I mentioned. Next. I'm going to let you advance them. So obviously when people say, what do you mean by that? When they're talking about mixed use development, they're often talking about the former Kmart site and all of the controversies of the last couple of years over different ways that property could be reused by its owners. So we have what we can call here a grayed out shopping center in which the anchor tenants have faded or fading. And it's a big area. When you take the planning area together of the 500 Atlantic, 571, you're talking about a substantial amount of acreage in the town. So it means that there's a big canvas on which to imagine things. And maybe mixed use development would help here. Depends on what you mean by that. At the very least, it's worth examining it, because how this site turns out will affect how people see it, see the whole town in the future, and how you use the town, how it feels. So I want to say, as we look at images of it, to remember that everything we've just illustrated in the last couple of days is just starter ideas for the conversation that has to come. It's not finished. It's not. We've made some pretty cool little graphics to compare alternatives, mainly because we realized that there's going to need to be a bit of a process of elimination. Well, where you say, could you do this? Maybe. Could you do that? No, that doesn't work. And go down through the list. Now, one possibility is that, in keeping with the existing zoning on the property, that one could keep your fingers crossed and just hope that it could come roaring back to life as a shopping center, 1960s style shopping center with the parking in the front and the one-story building in the back and big retailers. Not impossible, but on a chart, which we'll make, I think we should probably put these all into a chart. I would say having this come roaring back as a shopping center of the kind it used to be is highly improbable. And some people in the real estate business would probably argue it both ways. But what you need to know about retailing is that nationally, even before the COVID-19 crisis, we've been in several years of a massive retailing contraction. And, some people call it the storefront Armageddon, the great retail real estate meltdown of America. Because for 40 years or so, we were building so much excessive square footage per person for retailing, there's too much of it. And surplus is a problem. So there's been a correction underway for a while, and accelerated by the gradual shift to online retailing. Let me say that in the last month, there's been a lot more online retailing, and people that may never have ordered something and had it delivered have tried it out for the first time in the last month while they've been confined during stay at home. And so companies that do online retail like Amazon and Best Buy and the like, also CVS and Walgreens, are seeing a massive uptick in the number of things that are delivered straight to people's houses instead of having you come to their shopping center to do it. And that's one of the reasons we wanted to look at those ideas earlier with Lisa about the coming changes in mobility. Big parking lots like this are probably a relic that will not be necessary in the next generation in the way that they were before. So let's just walk through what some of the what ifs could be. Like if you can't do it as another Kmart because you don't have Kmart anymore, just like you don't have Sears, you don't have Circuit City, and you don't have Linens and Things, and so forth. You don't have Sports Authority. What could you do? Well, one thing that will change the prospects for this property is to get going with a refurbishment plan for A1A. On Atlantic Boulevard and 3rd Street, as you saw in some of those cross sections, we think it would be feasible to undertake a refurbishment of the street and a re-landscaping of the street, an adjustment of its cross section over time so that it was more pleasant to walk along. Can you just back that up one slide, Louisa? And so this is the before picture, existing conditions. Next slide, after. And what we've shown here is just to make the point, out there, how many trees are missing? Now, how much more possibility of a shaded sidewalk could be created? Now, once that's done, what happens next to it? Next. Now, this is an alternative that you may not have thought of, and it has, in the ranking of pros and cons and probability, it probably has a lot of cons, and probably has a medium to poor probability. But I thought we should examine it because it's been brought up several times. What if instead of driving to shopping centers, you have a lot more people making deliveries to your house, and have Amazon, who used to try and get things to you overnight, and then if you're an Amazon Prime member, say, we'll get it to you the same day. And now in most cities, you can get things within a couple of hours. Their goal is to get you the products that they sell within half an hour. So one possible reuse of this site, probably not drawn here to scale, but just to give you an idea of it, would be as some kind of last mile fulfillment center. This is a building full of robots filling orders. Big trucks come in one side, small trucks and cargo bikes and so forth, the little vans come out the other side, and they bring things the last way to home. I mentioned pros and cons. First of all, I think if a landowner were trying to compete for this use, they'd have a couple things working against them. One, it's not likely to pay very much rent. There are so many grayed out and surplus shopping centers around the region that there are a lot of other sites to choose from. And some of those options, for a second reason, are closer to things like the interstate. So it remains an open question whether this could actually be feasible. Meanwhile, in the pros and cons analysis, cons include, since it's a low rent use, it's probably also a low property value use that is not going to do a lot for the community's tax base. And depending, of course, on how it was done, how it was screened, or how it was architecturalized, might not do much for the image and character of the place either. But that's one of the kinds of things that happens to these shopping centers these days. And you may have been watching the headlines and realized that Amazon, for one, has recently been buying shopping centers in the Jacksonville area just for this sort of thing. Next. Now, here's another option, which we've just done in a kind of color-coded way here first, that developers in the past called lifestyle centers. And a lot of these were built around the country over the last 20 years. Not many are being built now, and that's an important thing to realize. But lifestyle center is like a shopping mall, except outdoor, and like a strip shopping center, except it has a walkable street scene. The buildings are kind of tucked up. Restaurants and small stores can face a street or public space, and the parking is generally behind. And then, so here's a scenario, just a made-up make-believe scenario in a way, in which part of the existing buildings are reused to house some new anchor, whatever that might turn out to be. Part of the existing buildings are demolished to make room for more parking. And then what's built out in the former parking lot is a combination of 1- and 2-story buildings, maybe some office space upstairs, restaurants and things like that on the ground level. We also illustrated in this image something people asked us about. They said, couldn't part of this site someday, whether it's on the east part or the middle part or the west part, hold a parking garage, a public garage where people could park and then take an electric shuttle or walk the last quarter mile to the beach. So that's illustrated here for just kind of a what if scenario. Can you go to the next one? Here we kind of take the colors off where the pink color meant retail, and just, what such a thing how it might look. Now, probability, pros and cons. Probability low. Like I said, a lot of these were built over the last 20 years around America. You probably know of a couple of examples in town. Not many are being built now. Why? Well, first, there's that retail Armageddon I talked about. This is a retail-led reuse strategy for the site. And anything retail-led is going to be a question, at least for the coming period. It could be that if you waited long enough for the market to evolve, for retailing to evolve, and for the economy of the town to evolve, maybe some reuse like this would work. And the key to that is if you waited long enough. We don't know how long you might have to wait, how long the property might sit fenced and vacant while waiting for some creative reuse. So probability not too good. Pros and cons. Well, pros, something like this, if it were doable, would be doable without a big controversy over its apartments, because the illustration doesn't show any apartments. And we realize that that's a toxic, politically toxic word for whatever reason. And Neptune Beach, that a lot of people listen carefully to see if you're going to suggest apartments, and then that's what they hear about. They want to know whether you're doing that or not. Well, something like this wouldn't require apartments, so in the pro column could be built with and proposed without having to confront without having to run a political campaign to succeed in getting rezoning to permit it. Cons, well, in addition to being improbable, it would add 1-story retailers and restaurants in a town where you already have a collection of 1-story retailers and restaurants east of 3rd that are going to need all the help they can get coming back from the present crisis. And so it raises the question whether adding so much more of that and hoping to sponge up retail customers with this much retail square footage would actually be a big benefit to the beach's town center. That's one of the kinds of things that could be investigated and quantified further. Take it one more. Louisa, forward one. There you go. Okay. So here's an out-of-the-box, completely different option. And if you like this option, then give our illustrator James Doherty credit for it. If you hate this option, you can blame it on me because I suggested it. And honestly, just to be really clear here, what I'm about to describe wasn't suggested in our public meetings. I just thought it up and said, why don't we try this? Because I was looking for some alternative that would be both economically feasible at some point, if not immediately, but without having to wait generations for it to be feasible. And some option that might be politically doable. And whether that's true, no one knows. So consider this a trial balloon for the 55 of you that are watching, and nothing more. It's just a what if. In this scenario, the northern part of the property, which is in the foreground, right above the word Atlantic on the label, Atlantic Boulevard, is are buildings that have downstairs storefront uses like restaurants and so on, and upstairs office uses. So think that you can compare the scale on these. These are, comparable to the building where Hawker's restaurant is located now, with the office space above it, just a little bit east of here. So this is doing more of that. And we drew that here specifically because when we asked people, well, what recent development do you like? Lots of people pointed to that one. So this pushes the street scene that is commercial toward the north. And then it imagines that a lot of the rest of the property could be used for housing in some form, possibly owner-occupied housing. I'm going to come back to that in a second. If that helps resolve some of the qualms about rental apartments that we've heard expressed, and maybe some combination of the two. Remember that the city doesn't have the authority to require that a given residential unit be used only for an owner-occupied. That's not done in zoning. That's a case where a municipality's hands are very much tied by the law, by the case law, by fair housing law, and so on. So the city regulates how tall it can be, how many units per acre it can be, how much parking there is, where the building is positioned on its lot. The city doesn't regulate whether a given dwelling unit is used for rentals or for ownership. You might be able to do some combination of the two, but remember, coming into recession, it's hard to anticipate doing well financially for any developer with owner-occupied luxury housing. We would have to wait until the economy dramatically improves, and the down cycle, where likely that the economists are heading into, has ended, and we're on some sort of uptick and going forward. Can you just advance one slide? I'll take the colors off. You went the wrong way. Go the other way. There you go. So this is that same scene I showed you with the orange on it, just taking the colors off. And what you're seeing illustrated here is the idea that it might be possible to, instead of trying to do bigger and bigger buildings that have bigger and bigger footprints, to try to achieve some kind of economy of scale. Like the Kmart, for example, doesn't pay a lot of rent per square foot. It has a lot of square feet. This goes the other direction, and it says, what if we envisioned building a collection of smaller buildings rather than a handful of bigger buildings? And that, of course, suggests higher prices and luxury, which is both pro and con. But in this scenario, that southern third of the property, let's say, or southern half, depending on where you draw the line, is used for predominantly housing uses. Those could be, like most of Neptune Beach, a combination that includes houses, single family detached houses, probably bigger, grander ones that are closer together, and not too terribly many of those, because the market for those over the next 20 years will also shrink. It can include duplexes, which is like a big house, but has 2 units in it. And that's something so common east of 3rd and between 3rd and the beach, that we thought you might be able to use a pattern like the one you see here to reflect the historical pattern. It could include small cottages. You can point to a couple of there toward the back. It could include larger buildings. It could include live-work combinations. It can include the accessory dwelling units, or granny flats, as they were called in a spasm of political incorrectness. We don't call them that anymore. That's a gender-biased term. They're accessory dwelling units, but that's the small in-laws quarters or granny flat outbuilding with a dwelling in it that you talked about earlier. It can include row houses, like are shown here around the square in the middle of the picture. Those are great because they have narrow lots, but they produce a lot of dignity toward the street. So these are housing options, right? And it can include small multifamily buildings. We've illustrated a few places here where in among the houses in a comparable scale, a small number of multifamily buildings can be created against, it's conceivable those could be owner occupied. You could even have a property owners association or a homeowners group like you would with a condo, managing how those are operated. This is just thinking, and if you go forward one more, I'll show you a couple of additional details. One more slide. Yeah, right here in the middle of the picture is an example of one of those bigger buildings fit in among the smaller ones. That C-shaped building in the middle of your screen is of a size that would work for a small assisted living housing building, for example. Not a big one, not a huge complex, but part of a continuum of care. And in the very corner of your screen, you can see the hint of something you might have picked up on in the earlier shot, which is that parking structure. So there, we are not selling this. I'm just saying it's an idea. I wonder if it might be possible to add the numbers up and have it work. And I can tell you for sure, no one knows. We haven't done the numbers. We haven't tried to see how many units per acre would fit. We haven't tried to see whether there's an existing zoning category that could be used or modified to use for something like this. It's simply a new alternative besides the previous ones that everybody has given so much thought to, but haven't worked out. So, like I said, conversation started. Now go to the next slide if you don't mind, Louisa, and I'll just speed through this. Zooming out a little bit, I look at this map and I realize that the beach is town center east of 3rd on the right side of your screen, and the big shopping center area west of 3rd that we were just talking about are really all parts of the same community. They are two important neighborhoods. They are certainly visually different. They grew up at different times. But in the end, you're all in this together. There must be some way to weave these two sides of the town better together, particularly if you're going to want pedestrians to make their way back and forth across 3rd. So go to the next one. First, here's that initial what if that illustrates the idea that Atlantic and 3rd should be upgraded. What if instead of being the most forgettable, least attractive streets in the town, they were modified with tree lines and better architecture along them over time, so that they were proud signature corridors, like gateways to the neighborhoods that you were proud to take your visitors or down as they approached your house. That's an idea why that transportation stuff you heard earlier from Rick is so important. On the eastern end of Atlantic, what if that last block east of 3rd was made like a plaza instead of like a street that's not quite a street? What if it were like a public space that had outdoor dining and had, invited the redevelopment of the motel that's on the south side of the block, south side of Atlantic, between 1st and the beach? That I think the eventual redevelopment of that motel is inevitable. So it'd be a good time now to think, when that happens, how can we make it fit in and join up with the historical buildings, with Pete's Bar, with the Hawkers building, and so on as part of a scene. And then you see we shaded in a special section of 1st itself, wondering if maybe 1st it could undergo another round of streetscape improvements that would allow it, for example, to go from a street with curb and gutter to a curbless street, and from time to time closed to traffic at certain times of the day or days of the week. Step in the direction of a request we heard from a number of people, which is make more of the town center pedestrian first. Some said pedestrian only, but at least pedestrian dominated. And of course, if that works, you could expand from there over time. Go to the next one. Now, here's putting those two ideas that you just heard together. One for west of 3rd, where there are some new buildings built in the former parking lot, or maybe one more slide. The existing shopping center is rethought in its entirety and becomes the next great neighborhood there. So you're seeing the two on the same map. And what you probably noticed by now is Lemon Street becoming, instead of a barrier between the two sides, a connection. Not quite ready yet for a lot of people to make their way back and forth. Next. So here's a big out-of-the-box idea. We heard a lot of very mild, and I would just, being an editor, I would say timid ideas for how to very barely improve the crossing at 3rd and Atlantic, but it's 7 lanes wide to step from as a pedestrian from the east side to the west side. And until that's fixed, there's always going to be a problem. So what you're seeing illustrated here, which we'll show you in a close-up, is the idea of redesigning the whole intersection. So you cross two-lane roads instead of one 7-lane road. More to come on that. Next. So zooming out a little bit, and then before and after. Now you can see how the idea of an interconnected system of streets and blocks, like in the historic town, could be implemented west of 3rd and join the two together with both Atlantic and Lennon. And then we've added to that other things. These illustrative plans are kind of like a big bulletin board where we put each idea as they come up and see how they go together. So here you see ideas for improving the public park that's just south of the existing senior center. Next. And adding the trail to the canal. Now that intersection at Atlantic and 3rd was the single most raised issue I heard in conversations. It's almost like a cloud of uncertainty for the future of pedestrian life in the town. Fixing it would be like a big symbol. It would be a message to everybody. You're taking this issue seriously, not just the safety, but the comfort of an experience that people are having. Next. So here's a close-up on that big idea. The red line is down the center of Atlantic is, of course, the border between the two towns. So you have an opportunity for a lot of teamwork here between the DOT, Transportation Planning Organization, Atlantic Beach, and Neptune Beach. Next. And then here's an initial layout of how you might take the one 7-lane road and redo it so that all the turns are accommodated. The traffic works just as well or better than it does now for motoring, perhaps a free right from eastbound to southbound, and then also make a public space. Next. And so here's that then implemented with the idea of a public space and eventual redevelopment. I think just like what I said about the shopping center, you can predict that the Walgreens and CVS will eventually be redeveloped. You can predict that the Starbucks, where used to be a gas station, or that Starbucks is now, will also be redeveloped. And so here's just a quick placeholder what if sketch for those three things coming together: a redo of the intersection and a redo of the real estate on both sides. Next. Again, that's an idea that needs a lot of scrutiny. But it does remind us to look back at the historic pattern of the town. And that doesn't just apply here in the town center. It applies in other parts of town as well. Like here, for example, is the piece of the old historic plat. And can you put your cursor on Atlantic Boulevard and Florida Boulevard so they can see how historically that was originally imagined, where Mayport, Florida come together? Mm-hmm. Now go to the next one. In other words, your historic town is interconnected street network, blocks that are subdivided into parcels and lots that have individual development projects on them. And that goes together in an interconnected pattern. So then we looked over at the phenomenal, changing, interesting area where the Brewhound dog park has been recently created. This is an older aerial photograph, so we just marked Brewhound for you so you can see where it goes. And then we thought, what would it be like if those philosophies were applied over on this end of Atlantic and Florida? So next. So this changes from a before to after. Now you can see the Brewhound is like it is. And then this just illustrates evolution over time of a little workplace emphasis village. The idea of new buildings that can have small amounts of office space or creative space, maker space, places where people are working and making things. Someone suggested we look at Pawleys Island and St. Simon's and other places like that as precedents for this idea of building up a village from more smaller buildings rather than fewer bigger ones. On a new street like the one in the middle of the picture, I could imagine a gallery wanting to be there because they know somebody's going to come see the dog park and they want to show off what they have. It's not inconceivable that you could see a combination of live work users here. If I have to make a prediction about 2020, it's that a whole lot of people have been working from home for the last month, and they're not going to be all that excited about going back into that long and miserable commute to downtown Jacksonville. There might be an opportunity for somebody who produces office space closer to where they live in Neptune if they do it in a way that architecturally feels comfortable and is street oriented and friendly. And they could take somebody who's now tired of working out of their spare bedroom or their dining room table wants to get back to the office and work with some colleagues that doesn't want to drive all the way downtown. And that's a business opportunity for workplaces in small quantities along Atlantic. Next. Louisa.
Yep. Can you see the slide?
Yeah, we can see it. Go right ahead.
Okay. So this is the last thing we're going to show you. We heard this from a lot of people. We asked the question online if people thought there was an opportunity for more art and spaces for cultural production, like Victor mentioned, creative office space, co-working space, maker spaces. And we asked people, if they had any ideas for how art can be incorporated. And we heard a lot about this intersection. And this drawing, I will caveat, was produced just about an hour ago or 2 hours ago now. So we're still going to be working on it and adding to it, but it's just to show a concept for how this main entry point that was in the original plat that Victor showed you, supposed to be your central location of Neptune Beach, the grand entryway into your city. And unfortunately, through the overpass, has become an area that's seen a lot of disinvestment. So this is what it could be, just to show you what it looks like now for comparison. Even small tweaks. I mean, you have a blank canvas at this underpass to do a lot of great art. We had a technical meeting with local artists. There's an incredible artist community, not just in the beaches, but in the greater Jacksonville area, who are active and engaged. That's a great resource. It's a way to, bring life back into areas that, haven't seen it in a while. But there's a lot of small tweaks. So here you can see it today and what it could be in the future. To Victor's point about some new small office spaces that could occupy this important corner. They would have great visibility for people entering through the highway. They could see their rooftop. They could put a great sign on their rooftop. If this were a co-working space of some kind. Also adding trees and minimal landscape improvements to these medians, cleaning them up already, and adding more high visibility crosswalks, unlike the ones that are a little bit faded and spread apart. Those small tweaks, in addition to the artwork, could go a long way in helping breathe some new life into this area. So here again, you can see what we've shown here as potential new infill development and art. So with that, we are once again over time. We have so much that we produced in 5 days, so we wanted to give you a chance to look at all of it in its draft form. I want to take this opportunity to thank the city of Neptune Beach and everyone who helped us throughout this week, all the facilitators who helped us on Monday night. Thank you again for your participation. We're scheduling a debriefing of everything that went on this week soon, so please keep checking our website, keep checking your emails for notice of when that will happen. If anyone has ideas that they feel like they didn't get a chance to express, we'll be sending out an exit survey for this presentation that will give everyone a chance to tell us what they liked, what they didn't like as well. And we invite you to record a short video. You can always tag us on social media if you just want to use your phone to tell us a new idea. You tag us at NB Vision Plan and we'll be able to see it on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. We'll be sending out an exit survey at the end of this presentation once we wrap up. And with that, I want to thank everyone. If there's any concluding remarks, Victor? Or anyone?
No, I'll jump in there, but took me a minute to get the mic. Sorry, Louisa. First of all, we got a lot of great questions in the Q&A box, and we've answered some of them as we went. Lisa answered some, both in chat and comments. I've answered some. We'll get to more of them. But there's so much time ahead of us for digging deeper into this stuff, scrutinizing it some more, asking more questions. Remember, everything was marked draft. So if we didn't get to your question tonight, don't worry. There's more time, and keep asking. Then on the survey, you can also flag any important burning question that you want us to dig deeper into. One of the questions you're going to be asked is, what needs more investigation? We're trying to figure out what the promising ideas are that are worthy of more refinement. And so you can help us by filling out that survey and stay involved. There's a lot left to come. Last, I just thank you to all the people who helped. We had a ton of assistance, not just from the people who do this for a living, but certainly the city staff who had to fit this activity in among all the other things that they're working on. Your elected officials who were involved hands-on all week, neighborhood leaders, property owners, lots of people contributed in many ways to keep getting us up to speed. So thank you to all of them. Thanks to Mary Frojo and Neptune Strong for doing an extra effort to convene groups and send links. There's so many people to thank, and we have a lot left to do together. So stay one big team like we built this week, and we'll get there. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Good night.
Louisa, if you could leave it on just for a second, and
Sure.
allow people to find their link to the survey. I can finish answering a question.
Sure.
I want to make sure before we close the room, I get a chance to look at all the Q&A that we didn't answer yet. Okay, great. Good on my end. Great job, Louisa. Did you get a group photograph of a picture or two of this very interesting event going on? Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Rick, Brenda, Tab, and Fred Jones, and others who contributed along the way.
Great job! Yay!
My wife's ready to have supper. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye-bye.